The Nevari Exploration Committee had catalogued exactly 417 worlds where vegetation achieved what military conquest could not: total, absolute dominance over sentient life. Verdis 7 sat comfortably at number 32 on this list, which might suggest it was merely moderately lethal rather than extraordinarily so. This would be a catastrophic misunderstanding of how the list worked. The rankings weren't ordered by danger, they were ordered by discovery date. Verdis 7 had earned its reputation the old-fashioned way by systematically consuming 3 separate colonization attempts from 3 different species, none of whom shared genetic material, atmospheric requirements, or the good sense to leave well enough alone. The planet's jungle didn't just grow, it strategized, it planned, it executed with the efficiency of a corporate merger and the mercy of a black hole. Trees on Verdis 7 grew at rates that made bamboo look contemplative. Vines moved with purpose, not the slow creeping purpose of normal plants, but the I have places to be and people to strangle kind of purpose. The local ecosystem had developed approximately 67 different ways to kill you, and that was just counting the plants. The animals had apparently decided that with competition this fierce, they might as well become plants too, which resulted in a confusing mess of ambulatory flowers that screamed and ate things. The atmospheric composition was tolerable for most oxygen-breathing species, which was almost cruel. Verdis 7 could have had the decency to be toxic, to kill potential colonists quickly and mercifully from orbit. Instead, it invited them down, let them breathe easily, let them think they had a chance, and then systematically demonstrated why optimism was a statistical error. When the human colony ship Perseverance entered orbit, the Nevari observer assigned to document their inevitable demise actually felt something resembling pity. Commander Reeve Chen, the human expedition leader, had read the reports with the kind of attention people usually reserve for furniture assembly instructions, which is to say barely any attention at all. Says here the Krillex colony lasted 48 hours, Chen remarked, scrolling through the datapad with one hand while drinking something called coffee with the other. The beverage smelled like burnt regret and looked like liquid punishment. The Krillex are 12 feet tall, with exoskeletons that can deflect plasma fire. The Nevari observer, whose name translated roughly to "he who documents failure," replied. He had given up on his actual name after the 5th species mispronounced it. They brought industrial clearing equipment. The jungle consumed the equipment, then consumed them. The salvage team found pieces. Small pieces. Interesting, Chen said, in the tone people use when something is decidedly not interesting. And the Phelim expedition lasted 9 days. They attempted to use controlled burns. The plants adapted, developed fire resistance in real time. Then they developed fire projection. The Phelim expedition became a forest fire, but the kind where the forest is doing the firing. We retrieved their distress beacon from inside a tree that had apparently learned to digest metal. Chen handed the datapad back. We'll be fine. This response baffled he who documents failure on several levels. Humans had a reputation in the galaxy, certainly. They came from a death world themselves, Earth, where apparently everything was trying to kill everything else all the time, and they had emerged as the apex predator through sheer stubborn refusal to die. But Verdis 7 was different. This wasn't competition, this was annihilation. This was nature with a capital N and a violent agenda. Commander Chen, he tried again with the patience of someone explaining gravity to a creature that insists on floating. Perhaps you misunderstand. The jungle will not negotiate. It will not coexist. It will consume your equipment, your structures, and eventually your people. This is not speculation. This is documented fact across multiple species, multiple biologies, multiple technological levels. The common factor in all failures was the planet, not the colonists. Chen smiled. It was not a reassuring smile. It was the kind of smile that suggested she knew something the universe didn't. You've never seen Human's Garden, have you? Who documents failure had not in fact seen Human's Garden. This seemed irrelevant to the conversation about imminent death, but he filed the observation away for his report. The landing shuttles descended through Verdis 7's atmosphere like coffins with engines, which seemed appropriate given the circumstances. Who documents failure accompanied the first wave, recording equipment ready, obituary templates prepared, insurance paperwork queued. The shuttles set down in what the preliminary surveys had identified as a relatively clear area, which meant only 60% of the ground was covered in vegetation, instead of the usual 95%. The cargo ramps lowered with hydraulic hisses that sounded like final breaths. The humans emerged, wearing basic environmental suits but no armor, carrying equipment but no weapons in the traditional sense. Who documents failure activated his recorder, noting the timestamp for when the screaming would begin. The humans looked at the jungle. The jungle, if plants could be said to look at anything, looked back. Vines shifted with anticipation, their movements almost eager. Trees leaned forward imperceptibly, branch tips quivering. Somewhere in the distance, something howled, then was abruptly silenced, presumably by a different something with better teeth. The air itself seemed to thicken, as if the planet was holding its breath before the feast. "Right then," said Chen, clapping her hands together with the enthusiasm of someone about to start an enjoyable hobby. "Let's get started. Martinez, you're on primary clearing. Rodriguez, perimeter burn protocol. Jackson, get the heavy equipment off the shuttles. Everyone else, you know your jobs. Try not to die in any embarrassing ways. The insurance paperwork is terrible." The first human off the ramp was a broad-shouldered woman named Martinez, who carried what appeared to be a spinning blade attached to a long handle. She approached the nearest tree, which had bark that could deflect small arms fire, roots that could sense vibrations from half a mile away, and a documented history of impaling 3 Krillex colonists simultaneously. She pulled a cord. The blade screamed to life with a mechanical shriek that sent local bird analogues fleeing. The tree didn't stand a chance. The blade bit into bark that should have been impenetrable, chewed through wood that should have been harder than steel, and the tree, perhaps in shock at encountering something more aggressive than itself, simply fell over. "That's a chainsaw," Chen explained to he who documents failure, who was frantically updating his notes with trembling manipulators. "Mostly we use them for lumber processing. They work quite well on aggressive plant life too. Satisfying sound, don't you think?" "The bark is reinforced with silicate structures," he protested weakly, his understanding of botany crumbling. "It should be resistant to conventional cutting tools. The Krillex industrial saws couldn't penetrate it." The tree fell over with a crash that sent birds or bird-adjacent creatures exploding from the canopy in a panic that suggested they had never witnessed trees losing arguments before. "Sorry, you were saying?" Chen asked, cupping her ear theatrically. "How is that possible?" Who documents failure managed. "Diamond-tipped carbide chain," Martinez called out, already moving to the next tree. "We didn't spend all that travel time idle. Analyzed your reports, studied the bark composition, engineered appropriate solutions. Humans are excellent at making things that cut other things. We've had a lot of practice." Within the first hour, the humans had cleared a perimeter of 50 meters. This should have been impossible. The Krillex, with their industrial equipment and considerable physical strength, had managed 30 meters before the jungle adapted and overwhelmed them. But the humans weren't using industrial equipment. They were using what he who documents failure could only describe as aggressively simple tools operated with disturbing enthusiasm. Chainsaws, machetes that looked like they were forged from recycled starship hulls. Something called a brush hog that looked like it was designed by someone who had never seen a plant and had decided to prepare for the worst. And the humans wielded them with the kind of joy usually reserved for recreational activities, which, he was beginning to suspect, this was for them. The vines are moving, he warned, pointing to where several thick ropes of vegetation were slithering across the ground toward the human position like biological assassins. They're carnivorous. They constrict prey and inject a digestive enzyme through barbs along their length. The Phelim documented the process extensively before they succumbed. A human named Rodriguez saw the vines. "Oh, cool," he said, which seemed like an inappropriate response, given the immediate threat of death by constriction. He produced a device that spat flame in a controlled arc. The fire blew hot and precise. The vines recoiled, then burned, thrashing in what might have been agony if plants could feel pain. "We call this a flamethrower. Technically it's for brush clearing, but it works on most things that don't want to be on fire. Which, to be fair, is most things." The Phelim used fire. He who documents failure said desperately, watching his preconceptions about botanical dominance burn along with the vines. The plants adapted. They developed resistance within days. "Yeah, but did the Phelim use enough fire?" Rodriguez grinned, adjusting the flame intensity higher. "That's always the question, isn't it? Humans have a saying, if a little fire doesn't solve the problem, you're not using enough fire. Also, we're not using regular fire. This burns at about 1500 degrees. The plants can adapt to a lot, but thermodynamics is thermodynamics." By the end of day one, the humans had cleared 200 meters in every direction and had begun erecting prefabricated structures that would serve as their base camp. The jungle, for its part, seemed confused. This was understandable. Usually, by day one, it had already started the digestion process. Usually, there were screams, panic, desperate attempts at evacuation. The humans were singing, actual singing, work songs about bottles on walls and people named Johnny coming home. Day two brought new challenges. The jungle, apparently realizing it was dealing with something unprecedented, began its adaptation protocols. Trees that had taken hours to cut down the previous day now had bark that was 40% denser, growing in layers that interlocked like natural armor plating. Vines developed rudimentary fire resistance, their outer layers charring but protecting the core. A species of carnivorous flower that typically waited for prey to approach instead began actively hunting, which was alarming. They moved on root legs, 6 petals arranged around a central maw, filled with what could only be described as botanical teeth. The humans responded by bringing out heavier equipment. "Is that a bulldozer?" he who documents failure asked, watching a massive yellow machine rumble off a cargo shuttle like a mechanical predator descending from its den. "That's a bulldozer," Chen confirmed with obvious pride. "We have 6 of them. Also excavators, skid steers, a couple of backhoes, and something we've affectionately named the deforester, which is probably not environmentally responsible, but given the circumstances, I think we can be forgiven. Environmental responsibility is a luxury afforded to ecosystems that aren't actively trying to murder you." The bulldozers approached the tree line like armored cavalry from ancient human history, yellow paint bright against the green darkness. The jungle threw everything it had at them. Vines wrapped around treads with the grip of biological steel cables. Trees deliberately fell in their path, trunks aimed like falling spears. A swarm of those ambulatory flowers attacked the operator's cabin of the lead vehicle, petals scraping against reinforced glass, trying to find purchase, trying to find entry, trying to find flesh. The lead operator, whose nameplate read Jackson, simply turned on the windshield wipers. The flowers, surprised to discover that their fearsome assault was being treated like light rain during an inconvenient commute, lost their grip and were flung aside into the underbrush. Jackson continued forward, blade down, pushing trees over like they were annoying rather than lethal, like they were inconveniences rather than apex predators of the plant kingdom. "This is impossible," he who documents failure muttered, updating his documentation for the 17th time that day. His report was beginning to read like fantasy rather than scientific observation. The energy expenditure alone should be unsustainable. Where are you getting the fuel for these machines? The Krillex ran out of fuel by day 2. They hadn't anticipated the resistance. "Brought it with us," Chen said cheerfully, watching another tree surrender to physics and human engineering. "Also, we're setting up biofuel production using local biomass. Turns out when you clear this much vegetation, you end up with a lot of raw material. Waste not, want not. The jungle wants to consume us. Fair enough, we'll consume it right back. Metabolically speaking, we're turning this into a very aggressive symbiotic relationship. You're turning the jungle into fuel to destroy more jungle. Technically, we're turning it into fuel to clear more jungle. Destroying sounds harsh. We're just aggressively rearranging the local flora to better suit our needs. Think of it as extreme landscaping, hostile landscaping, competitive landscaping. That's the same thing, is it though?" Chen asked philosophically. "The jungle's still here, we're just negotiating about where." By the end of the first week, the humans had cleared 5 square kilometers. They had established a main base with permanent structures, 3 outlying camps with defensive perimeters, and had begun surveying for a road network that would connect their growing settlements. The Nevari Exploration Committee, receiving he who documents failures reports, initially assumed there had been a transmission error. Numbers that large simply didn't appear in colonization reports from Verdis 7. When he confirmed the numbers, they assumed he had been compromised by some kind of local psychotropic pollen, that he was hallucinating success where there was surely failure. When he sent video evidence, they stopped assuming anything and simply watched in silence, their understanding of botanical dominance hierarchy crumbling like stale bread. The jungle's counterattacks became more sophisticated, more targeted, more desperate. It developed trees that could regrow from stumps in hours rather than days, roots that dove deep and spread wide, waiting for the opportunity to reclaim lost territory. It produced a new species of vine that could conduct electricity, specifically targeting human electronics, wrapping around power cables and generators with malicious precision. It even managed to evolve a plant that produced a paralytic gas on a molecular level, similar to compounds used by 3 different advanced civilizations, a gas that should have dropped the humans in their tracks. The humans brought in air filtration units, insulated their equipment with rubber coatings, and started treating the stumps with something called herbicide, which he who documents failure learned was essentially chemical warfare, plant addition. The humans had developed poisons specifically designed to kill plants. They had industrialized botanical genocide and packaged it in convenient spray bottles. "Is there anything on Earth that doesn't involve conflict?" he asked Chen one evening, watching another section of jungle succumb to human persistence. The sunset painted the sky in oranges and purples, beautiful and serene, completely at odds with the systematic dismantling of an ecosystem happening below. "Knitting," Chen replied, after thinking about it for a long moment. though I knew a woman who got quite aggressive about it during competitions. Humans are a competitive species. We like challenges. We like proving we can do things people say we can't. This jungle, it's the best challenge we've had in years. Most planets we colonize just sit there and let us build on them. Boring. This one fights back. It's refreshing. It's trying to kill you. So was Earth for most of our evolutionary history. We're used to it. Frankly, we find it comforting. A planet that tries to kill you is honest. You know where you stand. We evolved dodging predators, surviving ice ages, outlasting droughts, outthinking everything that wanted to eat us. We're good at this. This is, dare I say it, our natural habitat. A death world is your natural habitat. All worlds are death worlds from a certain perspective. Earth just prepared us better than most. Week 2 brought the first human village. Calling it a village was generous. It was more accurately described as a deliberate provocation against natural order. The humans had cleared a circular area 3 kilometers in diameter, erected permanent structures with actual foundations dug into the hostile soil, and had begun planting their own vegetation. Earth vegetation. Tomatoes, corn, something called zucchini, that apparently grew aggressively even by Verdis 7 standards, which was saying something. You're planting your own plants? He who documents failure couldn't keep the disbelief from his voice. Here, in the middle of a hostile ecosystem that has consumed 3 separate expeditions, well, we need to eat. Chen pointed out reasonably. And shipping food from orbit gets expensive. Transport costs alone would bankrupt the colony in 6 months. Plus, our plants are surprisingly competitive. Give Earth flora half a chance, and it'll spread like, well, like weeds. Which most of them are, technically. Earth plants didn't survive billions of years of evolution by being polite. The local vegetation attempted to invade the human gardens, vines creeping over the fence lines, roots questing beneath them. The human gardens invaded back. Within days, Earth ivy was competing with Verdis 7 vines for wall space, and winning. Earth grass was choking out the local ground cover, spreading in aggressive green carpets. A tomato plant had somehow hybridized with something native, producing fruit that was probably toxic, but looked delicious, hanging in bulbous red clusters that gleamed in the sunlight. Your plants are colonizing the planet, he who documents failure observed, watching a particularly aggressive rosebush establish dominance over a local shrub species. Yeah, they do that, Rodriguez said, not sounding particularly concerned. He was watering the roses with obvious affection. We brought kudzu as an experiment. Probably shouldn't have. That stuff's aggressive even by our standards. It can grow a foot a day on Earth. Here, we're seeing 2 feet. The local ecology has no defense against it. We might have created a monster. You brought an invasive species to an already hostile planet. Invasive is such a judgmental word. We prefer enthusiastically adaptive. By week 3 there were roads, actual roads, paved and marked with yellow lines, cutting through the jungle like scars through flesh. The humans drove vehicles along them, transporting materials between their expanding settlements with casual efficiency. Supply trucks, personnel carriers, something called a pickup that seemed to be half vehicle, half cultural icon. They had established 7 villages now, each connected by this growing road network, each pushing back the jungle a little further, each a monument to human stubbornness. The jungle adapted again. It couldn't stop the humans, but it could make them work for every meter. Trees developed root systems that could crack pavement, erupting through asphalt in twisted tangles. Vines learned to avoid obvious detection, striking from canopy level instead, dropping on unsuspecting humans from above. The local fauna, taking notes from the flora, began coordinated attacks, packs of predators testing the human defenses with increasing sophistication. The humans adapted faster. They developed sensor networks to detect plant movement, electronic eyes that watched the jungle boundaries day and night. They bred earth plants specifically for aggressive growth to serve as buffer zones, botanical warriors that would fight their proxy war against the native species. They started using drones to map and spray herbicide on problematic areas before ground teams even arrived, turning surveillance into preemptive strikes. Most disturbingly, they began to study the local ecosystem, not to coexist with it, but to exploit its weaknesses more efficiently. "You're treating this like a war," he who documents failure said, watching another perfectly planned human operation dismantle a particularly stubborn section of old-growth forest. The operation moved with military precision, teams coordinating with hand signals and radio chatter, each person knowing their role, executing it flawlessly. "It is a war," Chen replied, her voice matter-of-fact. "The jungle made that clear when it killed those previous expeditions. The Krillex didn't declare war. The Phelim didn't want conflict, but the planet decided for them. We're just the first species that's winning. The first species that brought enough chainsaws." Month 2 saw the establishment of New Seattle, the humans' designated capital. The name was apparently some kind of reference to a city on Earth, a place that also had lots of rain and trees, though presumably fewer murderous ones. It sprawled across 20 square kilometers of what had been the densest jungle on the continent. Now it was streets and buildings and parks with carefully curated earth trees that looked nothing like the chaos they had replaced. Humans walked these streets without armor, without weapons, as casually as if they were on their homeworld. Children played in parks while their parents shopped in actual stores, selling actual goods. The jungle still surrounded the human territories, still pressed against the borders, still tried to reclaim what it had lost. But now there were barriers, walls, patrol routes, guard posts where humans watched the tree line with the bored vigilance of soldiers in peacetime, and humans who treated invasive vines the way most species treated mild inconveniences, with irritation rather than terror. He who documents failure filed his regular reports, each one reading more like science fiction than the previous one. The Nevari Exploration Committee stopped questioning his sanity and started questioning their fundamental understanding of ecological dynamics. They convened special sessions to discuss the implications. They reviewed centuries of colonization theory. None of it accounted for humans. "How long until the jungle overwhelms them?" his superior asked during a subspace call, the question sounding desperate, as if the natural order of the universe depended on the answer. "It won't," he who documents failure replied with certainty he didn't feel weeks ago, but felt absolutely now. "I don't think it can. The humans are planning their third city. They've started commercial logging operations. They're talking about exporting lumber to other colonies. They've turned Verdes 7 from a death world into a resource, into an opportunity, into a job. That's impossible." "Yes, I've been saying that for 2 months. They keep doing impossible things. I'm running out of ways to describe how impossible this is. My vocabulary for impossibility has been exhausted. I need new words." By month 4, the transformation was complete in all the ways that mattered. Verdes 7 still had vast jungles, still had dangerous flora and fauna, still killed the unwary and unlucky. But it also had humans. 12 settlements connected by a road network that spanned continents. Farms producing both earth and hybrid crops. Industries processing lumber, manufacturing furniture, exporting finished goods. A spaceport that handled regular traffic, ships arriving and departing with the casual frequency of a successfully colonized world. The planet hadn't been tamed exactly. That would suggest it had submitted. Instead, it had been forcefully renegotiated with, the terms dictated by chainsaws and bulldozers, and a species that simply refused to accept no from their environment. Chen stood with He Who Documents Failure at the edge of New Seattle, looking out over the jungle that pressed against the city's borders. The view was striking. Civilization meeting wilderness, concrete meeting chlorophyll, human ambition meeting planetary hostility. "You know what the real difference is?" she asked. "Between us and those other species who tried. Your capacity for violence against plant life. Well, yes, but also no. Those other species saw a hostile ecosystem and tried to survive it. Noble goal, understandable approach. But survival is defensive. It's reactive. We saw a hostile ecosystem and decided to compete with it. Active, aggressive. Earth taught us that nature isn't something you coexist with through passive acceptance. It's something you negotiate with through active participation. Sometimes that participation looks like harmony. Sometimes it looks like this." She gestured at the city behind them, at the buildings and roads and parks and people. "We're not surviving Verdis 7. We're colonizing it. Big difference. The Nevari Exploration Committee is considering reclassifying Verdis 7, He Who Documents Failure admitted, removing it from the Death World list. Your success has been too documented, too undeniable. It would be dishonest to keep calling it unsurvivable when you're building cities." "Don't," Chen said firmly. "It's still a death world. We're just the death that lives here now. We're the new apex predator. This planet killed 3 expeditions before us. It would kill 3 more if they weren't prepared, if they weren't human. Keep it on the list. Add a warning label. Death world, human occupied. Proceed with appropriate respect for both the planet and the occupants." The irony wasn't lost on He Who Documents Failure as he filed his final report 6 months after the human landing. The Nevari Exploration Committee had spent centuries cataloging worlds where nature dominated sentient life, documenting the many ways ecosystems could defeat civilization, proving that biology could triumph over technology, that evolution could beat engineering. They had never considered that some species might not see it as defeat or victory, but simply as landscaping on a planetary scale. Aggressive landscaping. Competitive landscaping. Landscaping with chainsaws and herbicide, and an absolute refusal to acknowledge that plants might have valid objections to colonization. Verdis 7 had indeed devoured previous expeditions, consuming them with the efficiency that had earned its reputation, proving its place on the Death World list. But the humans hadn't been devoured. They had, through sheer obstinate refusal to acknowledge that plants might have opinions about colonization, turned the devourer into the devoured. The jungle that had seemed eternal, invincible, unstoppable, now existed at human sufferance, permitted to grow in designated areas while clear paths and villages occupied the spaces between, while roads carved through its heart, while farms replaced its understory with tomatoes and corn. The galaxy would need new categories for worlds like this. Death world, human-occupied perhaps, or formerly lethal, or possibly just human, which was becoming its own classification for places where the natural order had filed a formal complaint and been politely ignored. Where ecosystems had tested themselves against civilization and discovered that some civilizations tested back harder. As He Who Documents Failure departed Verdis 7, he looked down at the planet from orbit one last time. The jungle still covered most of the surface, vast green expanses that went on for thousands of kilometers, but now it was interrupted by geometric patterns of human development, spreading slowly but inexorably. Roads caught the sunlight like silver threads. Cities glowed at night, electric constellations against the dark. The planet that had killed 3 expeditions now hosted farmers' markets and public parks, schools and shopping centers, all the mundane infrastructure of successful colonization. The galaxy had worried the jungle would devour the humans, had prepared documentation and disaster protocols and contingency evacuation plans. The humans had made it abundantly clear that the real question wasn't whether they would survive Verdis 7, but whether Verdis 7 would survive them. And the answer, based on current projections and environmental impact studies that made ecologists weep, was yes, but only because the humans found complete deforestation aesthetically unpleasing and preferred to keep some jungle around for ambiance, and because the local birds are pretty, and it'd be boring otherwise. Which, when he who documents failure thought about it, might have been the most terrifying thing about humans. They didn't conquer out of necessity. They conquered, then decorated. They turned death worlds into suburbs, not because they had to, but because they wanted a nice view. They fought an entire planet to a standstill, won decisively, and then decided to keep some of their enemy around because it looked nice and made the air smell fresh and provided interesting weekend hiking opportunities. The jungle had never stood a chance. Nothing that picked a fight with humans ever did. They were the species that looked at hostile ecosystems and said neat, a challenge. They were the species that brought chainsaws to biological warfare. They were the species that turned murder plants into lumber and then built furniture from the corpses. He who documents failure updated his final entry. Verdis 7 remains a death world. The humans are simply more death. The jungle, for its part, continued to grow in the spaces humans permitted, adapting to its new reality, learning the boundaries of its new existence. It would persist, it would survive, but it would never again rule this world unchallenged. The age of botanical dominance was over. The age of chainsaws had begun.